Some recent discussions put me back in the mind of the year that I spent working for the video game company Psygnosis in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where I was a help desk person. Not a QA person, not a game tester, but somebody who answered the phones so that people could understand how to get past that one level in Lemmings, or why Novastorm wouldn't boot on their Pentium because of some unknown problem that we could only fix by replacing the entire title. No, I wasn't a programmer, I wasn't somebody who made decisions, and I certainly wasn't anybody who had some sort of special power over Psygnosis. There were a few things that I learned internally, but on the whole, I was a low-level employee at a very far-flung outpost in the Psygnosis empire. Still, I think there's some lessons there that are worth going over. This is Jason Scott Talks His Way Out of It, a podcast about technology, history, and getting myself out of debt. Thanks to Jeff Atwood and the hundreds of other supporters on Patreon and elsewhere who have been supporting me and helping me get out of debt. I worked at Psygnosis because I was answering a request for temp workers. They wanted somebody who could answer calls about games. The fact that this was a company that had been huge in my teenage years just was the cherry on top. It wasn't only that it was Psygnosis, but that it was a small walk from my apartment at the time. I had been commuting an hour and a half to get to my other temp job, and going from 6 a.m. to 8:30 a.m. to be able to make it to work was a dream. I still remember so fondly rolling out of bed, putting on my clothes, and then walking down Massachusetts Avenue, picking up a Jolt Cola, and going up the elevator, waving to people as I went in, and then answering calls all day. The company I was really working for, Psygnosis US, was just an outpost created by Jerry Woloshenko to be a distribution point in the United States for Psygnosis. It didn't have any political power. We were told what to do, what packages might be delivered and kept downstairs, and that was it. We weren't making games there, not in the real sense, not having programmers and artists on a floor interacting and sharing code and floppy disks. No, we were more about the local phone call, the phone call that could be made with a 1-800 number instead of having to call England. We were the point where products would be shipped from so that international costs wouldn't come into it quite so much. It was on a single floor in an office building in Central Square in Cambridge, Massachusetts, with another floor of storage, about the size of a small deli, not really large, with shelf after shelf of game waiting for instructions to ship them where they needed to go. If you were ordering from Psygnosis directly, you were ordering from this building. And the floor didn't have a whole lot of employees. I don't think there were more than 20 people working there, including the tech people answering the phone calls like myself. We had people in sales, but it was 2 people in sales. We had people doing marketing and making phone calls, but again, it would be 1 or 2 people. We were not large. We never became large. When the company was bought out by Sony, there was a fight being done at the highest levels of the management, but that was between the UK and Japan. We didn't enter into it. The time that I was there, the PlayStation was announced and came out. I was able to play developer-only versions of some games, both for the PlayStation and the PC, games that never came out, games that were, in their own way, amazing, but somewhat shallow, or in need of some major rewrites, and they just missed the boat. They never came out. I got to see strange variations and promotional materials for Lemmings and the Discworld game and other games that were coming through the Psygnosis pipeline. I got to meet a few developers and a few producers who stopped by on their way to E3. And after that, I'm kind of struggling to think of anything else that I could brag about, anything else I could say, check me out. I was there. And that is why I am bringing all of this up. I worked at such a low level in this company. Nobody listened to me. I wasn't a voice of influence and reason. When I ended up writing a never-produced hint book for Lemmings 3D, I met the producers and I talked to them about the game, but I didn't influence the game. I didn't make something happen, and nothing stopped because I said no. But in 1995 and 1996, I had the privilege of working for a company that I had literally worshipped in my teens, a place I had dreamed of working at. When it was shut down and operations were moved to California, I had a conversation with the general manager, Maggie, who, to her credit, had a personal one-on-one meeting with everybody at the company who was being laid off. And while she was apologetic about how circumstances worked out, I told her that this was, for me, like being a roadie with the Rolling Stones and the tour coming to an end. And I really believed it. I still believe it. I felt like an insider. All of this was 30 years ago. 30 full years with a company that is long gone, completely absorbed into the Sony world of interlocking companies doing products their own way. Those times are fuzzy, hazy, prone to being embellished, changed, and the temptation is always there, as somebody who went through this world, to modify, to change where I was at different points, to play a story out to say that instead of something happening, I could say I was there when the decision was made. Maybe in a weak moment, I could describe how I was involved in that thing happening. But that would be a lie of omission, a lie of exaggeration. It just wouldn't be true. However, the temptation, the urge, is always there. I tell people I worked at Psygnosis. I somehow put my hand on the golden rock. I stood on the great stage. And while I didn't do anything, I don't have to tell people that that was the case. I can describe things that others don't see. When the PlayStation came out, there was a real attempt by the UK departments to redo the PlayStation as something that would appeal to ravers, to dancers, to nightclubs. There were actual nightclub places you could go to and play Wipeout on a screen when you weren't dancing. So, a part of the UK created drug paraphernalia branded with the PlayStation logo. I could debate somebody about whether or not this happened, but I know that happened. I remember looking at it and asking the marketers about it, and they weren't quite sure what it was because it was kind of reminiscent of acid blotter paper, and not everybody in the US was doing drugs. So it was a weird thing to experience, and under the light of people demanding evidence and photos, I don't know what I could tell you. But being at that moment doesn't preclude me being at every other moment. And I bring this up because the world has changed. The effort it takes to go from saying one thing to exaggerating into another is completely frictionless. There are endless opportunities to redo your narrative, to burnish your own reputation, to make things look a little better than they actually were. And it is a temptation, an extremely strong temptation. I don't know if there's an easy solution to it, But I do know how easy it is to fall into that approach. I've lived a lot of life in 30 years. I'm very proud of what has happened. I was 3 years away from founding textfiles.com on a whim. I was 5 years away from a documentary. And I was 15 years away from going to a wonderful archive that brought me in with a very thin resume and have let me run free for 15 more. Perhaps the lesson here is that instead of doing the lifting or the lack of lifting to portray yourself as more than you are, to instead think about ways that you could use your skills, your abilities, your personal footprint and abilities to become something worth bragging about, worth taking credit for, in those quiet conversations to the side when somebody incredulously looks at you and says, "That was you?" This is Jason Scott Talks His Way Out of It, thanks to James Bekoyanu, Ernie Hershey, Michael Rubin, David Fisher, Sean Kelly, Trixie the Cat, Symbionts, Benjamin Guts, and Anonymous, along with the hundreds of other supporters on Patreon and elsewhere who have been supporting me and helping me get out of debt. I did register Psygnosis.org, and that definitely needs to be burnished, not with my own great accomplishments that never happened, but a sense of understanding why that company was so special, and what about it I wish that we would see again and again in the modern era when frictionless bragging is rampant.